Welcome to WLNM, the web novel and manga review, hosted by Zeke Changuris.
Welcome to WLNM, the web light novel and manga review. We are dedicated to bringing our listeners the very special artists, writers that are part of this amazing explosion of creativity, giving us stories to entertain and inspire us. We'd like to welcome Haruto Tonbogiri, author of the original English light novel series, Cincum of War Stories. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome. So tell me, let's start off with the story. Tell me a little bit about Senkumo War Stories.
Right. So this is kind of long-winded, but
Go ahead.
I suppose we have to first talk about a different series of mine that came first,
Okay.
which is called Death by Exgirlfriend. The hilarious title of that. I came up with that some years ago and just kind of wrote it on the spot. Cincum of War Stories is sort of, I guess you can say, a prequel to Death by Ex-Girlfriend. It focuses on one of the sort of main characters from Death by Ex-Girlfriend, but it goes into their backstory, and that is that she is a war goddess, and she led her own clan during the Warring States era of Japan. So Cincum of War Stories is sort of a chronicle about what happened during that period and the downfall of the clan and all the various brutal things that happened. And I suppose that's the biggest difference between the two series, that Death by Ex-Girlfriend, as you can probably glean by the title, is very funny, very lighthearted. And Cincum of War Stories is very different to that in contrast. It's very brutal, very dark, and it tells a very tragic story. That's about it.
Kind of like the Christopher Nolan version versus Adam West.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. You got your tights and your funny one-liners, and then you got, death and blood and destruction.
Yes, and a Batman who speaks like he's yelling all the time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, where did the idea come from for either of these stories?
Well, I mean, when I was writing the second book of Death by Ex-Girlfriend, it introduces a character called Tsukiyakari. And when I was writing out her backstory, I just kind of made it up on the spot that she was a war goddess and she had gone through the Warring States period. I'd say the biggest influence behind that was I think I was reading Noragami at the time. I'm not sure if you heard of that manga.
Oh, Bishamon is one of the most beautiful characters in manga or anime. Let me tell you, she is all kinds of sexy.
I know, I love her. So yeah, that was the inspiration, was a kind of Yato's backstory. He essentially did the same thing, but I took Tsukiyakari's backstory and I guess pumped it full of steroids is how I interpret it. So she's not just a war goddess, but she led her own clan, and this clan was trying to create their own nation, so to speak, out of the ruins of Japan as it was going through this huge strife and era of civil war.
That sounds very interesting. Did you have to do a lot of research for that about the Warring States period?
Yeah, I a lot, hours of roaming through Wikipedia and Japanese sources and some first-hand accounts, which is really interesting. So I had to look into the succession dispute between the Onin War, which is like a prelude to the Warring States period, the Ashikaga shogunate. The Ashikaga clan was ruling Japan at the time. And it was Yoshimasa who was shogun at the time. He didn't have an heir. That was a huge issue. And his wife Tomiko surprised him because she gave birth to a son. So now there's this problem of now he has an heir, but he already asked his brother, his Buddhist monk brother, to sort of take the reins. So now you have this succession dispute where Tomiko wants the son to take the role of a shogun, as he should. It's a hereditary position. But then Yoshimasa already set things up with the brother. So that leads to clans like the Hosokawa and the Yamana sort of taking sides. Some of them took Tomiko's side, others took the shogun's side. And then that leads to the Onin War, which was, like I said, a prelude to the Warring States period. It was about a 10-year war that completely tore the city of Kyoto apart. And then after that, that's what led to Sengoku Jidai, This is what they call the Warring States period in Japan. And that's how the whole country got engulfed in that 100+ years of complete civil strife and political intrigue.
So, and this is what ends up setting up like the Towenaga shogunate, right?
Yeah,
The guys who have it
exactly.
after.
Yeah, the Warring States period ended with them ruling over Japan.
Yeah, I mean, civil wars are always messy, and when they're feudal, they're even worse because it's an all-out war, which is oh my, it's a fascinating period of history, but
Absolutely.
I wouldn't want to live there.
Well, the main character Tsukiyakuri has to live through it. I suppose that's the most fascinating part. It's one of the most brutal eras of Japanese history, one of the most violent, and she has to live through it. And like I said, the books are quite tragic and brutal in that regard. A lot of death, a lot of blood, a lot of unspeakable horrors that she goes through, and it all ends up tying back into Death by Ex-Girlfriend, which I think is the best thing about it.
Yeah, I think I'd have to go with what is the Heian period?
Yeah.
Yeah, that much more relaxed art, culture, not as much death and destruction.
Yeah, the Edo period came after Senkuguji died. That was also pretty peaceful until we came along and we forced Japan to open up.
Thank you, Admiral Perry.
Right.
Yes.
Thank you, Commodore Perry.
Yes. Okay. So what got you started as a writer?
Well, I suppose.
Did you always write, or was it
technically, yes, I always wrote. I mean, first thing that happened before I became a writer was I was a musician. Still am a musician, actually. I still do music, and music is how I make the most of my living. So I was already writing songs, lyrics, and stuff like that, and then I just extrapolated that talent into writing a story. Um, so I hopped on a site called Manga Raiders, which is still up, and some of my stories are still there, or drafts of them anyway. And I just started writing whatever came to mind, whatever was fun. And that's kind of how I got my start. And I got a lot of feedback from that community, and that helped me sort of improve everything that I was doing. And eventually, I came up with the idea for Death by Ex-Girlfriend one night, just out of the blue. Wrote it. It became a huge story on that site, and everyone was like, "Yeah, you should make it into a book. Do an actual series on it." And then that's how it all started.
Well, it's kind of fun when they get away from you like that. When you start with an idea and it just keeps growing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Oh, hey, I think Tolkien might be the most famous of us, who in a hole lived a hobbit, and he just went from there.
Yeah.
That was all the prompt he needed to create what 7 books, something absurd like that.
Some ridiculous number, and they're all really long.
Yeah. So, but yeah, it's funny where inspiration comes from and can strike. I mean, you can sit down and be like, oh, this is a great idea, and then you get there, you start hashing it out, and you get the page in, and you're absolutely stuck and out of gas.
Exactly.
Has that ever happened for you?
Well, yes. I mean, when I on that night I came up with Death by Ex-Girlfriend, the whole impetus behind that story was just, hey, what if all your ex-girlfriends kidnapped you one night and they tried to kill you, but they also still love you? That was that was the impetus behind the first chapter. And then I mean, from there I just ran with it, and I was making stuff up on the spot. And I would have days when I couldn't come up with anything. And then I'd have days where I was super inspired, and I would write like 6 chapters in a day.
Well, I think if that's having a apparent yandere taste in women might be hazardous.
Yes, I think that was the most unique aspect of it. It's a yandere harem, so everyone loves you, but they also want to kill you. Yeah, it's one of my favorite things.
Yeah, I mean, I still I'm a tsundere guy.
Yeah, most people are.
I know there's just something wrong with us. My wife can be a bit of that. I mean, she's the kindest, nicest person in the world, but she enjoys taking combat classes, so she could beat the crap out of me
Oh
if
man.
she so chose. So you just do everything you can to preempt any of the potential ensuing violence.
Well, guys like you like fighting for the prize, but I suppose us yandere fans just take it to like the hardest difficulty.
So, uh, out of the two series, which one is the series that you feel like most speaks to you? I mean, you're the creator of both, but sometimes we start with an idea and we write it and we even get through it, but we're okay, we're like, yeah, I think I did a good job on it. But then other times we write and we're like, this really, every character just felt like it was in my heart the whole time.
Hmm. Um, I would definitely say I'm biased towards Death by Ex-Girlfriend. Um, it's probably because it was just created first, but then I feel like when J.K. Rowling was writing the last book of Harry Potter, now that was like an emotional ordeal for her. When I was writing the last part of Death by Ex-Girlfriend, I legitimately didn't know what to do afterwards. Like my life felt empty. I spent so many time writing out these characters. I had so much fun doing it because one of the things that I set out for myself when I wrote that was, okay, if you're gonna write this story with a yandere harem of eccentric ex-girlfriends, then write whatever you want. Don't worry about censorship, or don't worry about if people are gonna find this okay or this scene okay. It was just write whatever you want, no matter how ridiculous it is. Um, and the first arc, I suppose you can call it, Ica Crisis, was just an experiment, and then every other arc after that, I got way better at the formula to the point where I knew the characters in and out. And by the time it ended, I was legitimately sad, which I think helped the ending. Um,
Yeah.
but I think that one is probably the closest to my heart. And Cincum of War Stories is unique and great as it is, and I especially love it because it gave me an opportunity to tell a darker, more brutal story. It really exists to support Death by Ex-Girlfriend and to give way more, I guess, backstory and context to some of the characters and some of the conflicts that show up later.
Well, thinking of characters, are you a character writer, or are you kind of a world building set writer? I mean, some of us, we build the worlds and then we set our pieces down and see what happens to them. Or does your character pull your world around?
I'm definitely a character writer myself. The characters came to mind first, all their quirks and personality traits, and then I built the world around them. I usually This happened because I usually don't like stories that focus so much on world building. Every detail of every economy or body politic, whatever, and then the characters end up being bland. So that was my focus, was the characters, because you can spend the most time with them. And in Death by Ex-Girlfriend, all the characters live together, so their interactions had to be entertaining. Their personalities had to be good, and there had to be character development in order to write a series that long and still keep it interesting.
It's good. I mean, it's good that you can not only create a character but truly help them grow to become more interesting. Because I know you experienced it and I've experienced it, where you get a character and it just stays flat the entire time.
Oh yeah, that's your average anime romance show, to be honest with you. It's just how most of the time you don't get the "I love you" confession until like episode 12, and by then it's already over.
Which kind of kills me, but yes.
Exactly.
I get really happy when things happen earlier in the series. Like, did you ever see Grand Crest War?
Yes, that was a show that I actually didn't like the first 3 episodes, but I gave it a second chance because everyone was saying it was good, and I was very pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, I mean, Theo and Sulika, they are in a relationship, in an intimate relationship. I think in the first 10 out of 24 episodes,
Hmm.
and I love that the fact that they get together so early in the show. that is a driving force behind their dynamic, and you don't often get that in a lot of anime or light novels.
Yeah, absolutely. I think another show that did that wasn't Asterisk War. It was another show that came out around the same
Oh,
time. I think it was
Chivalry of a Failed.
Chivalry of a Failed Knight.
Yep,
That was it. I think by the end of episode 3 or
one
4.
at the end of episode 1.
Really?
I think it's at the end of episode 1 because they're even living in the same bedroom at that time.
Oh, that's right. They
Yes.
just didn't make it official until like a few episodes later.
Yeah,
But it was
but
still pretty early in the
yeah,
show.
they're pretty much like a couple, like really quick. Yeah, which I appreciate when they get the chance to do that. When it ends up like that, it's nice to have people in sincere relationships right off the bat, because it's not all about getting to that. Something happens after happily ever after.
Yeah, a
There
lot
is the
happens.
happily ever after that needs to be reckoned with, and it makes me crazy sometimes that they spend all their time getting to that point and nobody is rolling camera afterwards.
Right. I think that the problem is if you're single for a long time, you don't have that much experience with girls, you probably think that courtship is the most fun part. It's not really, in my opinion.
It's not. It's the hard part.
You're right, exactly. It's the slowest part. That's the grind.
Yeah.
The fun happens afterwards.
Yes. Especially the way they run things in these stories. So yeah, I hear you there. It's, I've been married for almost 15 years now, and the best times have happened after I do. I mean, we had some great times before I do, but the last 15 years have been spectacular for me, and for both of us. So it's nice to see a story that shows that relationship factor grow and be explored. So, okay, well, we were talking about characters and such, but what's your favorite type of scene to write? What are you good at? Are you a battle guy? Are you a comedy guy? Are you a sex scene guy? What kind of writer? What kind of scene comes easy for you to write?
It has changed over time. I think when I first started Death by Ex-Girlfriend, I was really good at this sort of dialogue-heavy kind of Monogatari style scenes.
Okay.
Because I always have some sort of deep concept I want to convey, but like in a funny way that's not too heavy on the reader. And I think that shifted over to more like ecchi scenes. Ecchi.
Yeah, well, you get
CCHI, just
yeah,
making sure.
yeah,
And
just
then
yeah. I mean, you get more comfortable with yourself and your writing.
yeah, and that was bolstered by the fact again that I wanted to write without limits for that story. So I ended up coming with a lot of really weird sexual scenes. Nothing too out there, in my opinion, at least. But that was a strength for a while, and then I think after that, once we started getting into like the meat and potatoes of the characters and the stories and everything, I liked writing just personal interactions between two characters. Um, in particular, if I may bring up a specific example,
Go ahead.
there was the 7th arc of Death by Ex-Girlfriend called Inari Standoff. Basically, our main character, Osamu, he's going to go pick up his friend at the airport, and he goes to the bathroom, and he passes out. When he wakes up, he goes back out to the airport, and everyone's gone. There's just clothes and luggage strewn about the airport. The airport itself is empty. He then comes across Inari, who's this fox goddess, who's also introduced in Cincum of War Stories, and she's being hunted down by Exorcist. And they sort of meet, and that's how that arc takes off. It's him and Inari stranded at this airport, fighting off waves of Exorcists who are hunting them down. And one of the big themes about that arc is, at that point, those are two people, Osamu and Inari, who have been through a hell of a lot. They're both, in a lot of despair and a lot of pain, and they have a lot of moments together where, at first they don't trust each other, but over time, as they're fighting off Exorcist and working together, they come to an understanding, and they start opening up. And there's this one scene at night. They're just sitting in the one of the stores, a bakery, I think, and they're just talking about their past together. Everyone that they knew, that they loved, that at that point had passed away, all their losses and everything. And the chapter ends with them sort of crying together. So the biggest theme was love and understanding that's born out of darkness and sorrow. And those are the kind of scenes that I ended up getting more strength in writing. It was just these very emotional, I guess, climaxes, because you spend the past few arcs suffering completely, and then it feels like it's all meant to build up to that scene where everything just kind of comes out. So that's really it for me. Just characters bearing themselves. They end up being more than their stereotypes, more than their character tropes, and they just end up being as close to human beings as possible. That's my biggest strength.
Trying to make them, yeah, like you said, make them as human as possible, as close to flesh and blood as you can get, because if we can all find a place to identify with the character, that character is going to be easier for us to latch onto and, really be invested in their story.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where the whole character focus comes in, really. And funny you say flesh and blood. That's also a big theme of Inari Standoff. I did say that Death by Exgirlfriend was the more funny series, but it does have its brutal and dark moments, and that entire arc is about flesh and blood. Because, like I said, they're being hunted at that point, and there's a lot of brutality as Inari kind of kills all these exorcists, and Osamu has to see it and kind of see what person she's becoming, and that's kind of what sets off their chemistry. Is he's trying to stop her from becoming a monster, but at the same time, she realizes that he's just in a lot of pain.
What is it with the Japanese literature? I mean, we Greeks, we simply just worship our goddesses, and then usually get screwed over by them. But it's not a very fair relationship.
Right, I mean, he quite literally gets screwed over a lot of times. I think
Yes.
didn't Zeus turn into like a swan or something?
He's turned into swans, bulls, you name it. Yeah. Which you can think what you might from any of those incarnations.
He's quite freaky, isn't he?
Yes, he is.
He's really like the father of hentai.
Yes. Think about that. Yep. That's a good way of putting it. Yep. So, is there a favorite light novel series or anime that you're currently watching?
Well, since ReZero has started up again, I've been watching that a lot. Besides for that, Sword Art, Alicization.
Yeah.
That's been pretty good so far.
The novels are pretty good too.
Yeah, I've got to read those. I have some Nisio Ishin novels I haven't read. I read Kizumonogatari recently.
Yeah.
After reading, after watching the movies, they're mostly the same. But I think they do offer a little more insight into Araragi's perspective and his inner thoughts. And in terms of manga, I just finished reading Dome Kano, and I still don't know what to do now. I've stuck with that manga for so long. It's like once it ends, it's like, what do you read next? So when I finished that, I've been reading Ane no Mono. That's cool.
Well, you could just move on to One Piece and know that it will never end.
Yeah, we all say that about the big three. But then I remember when people were making the same jokes about Naruto and Bleach, and look where we are now.
Yeah. But I mow through the light novels, so I just finished the most recent SAO novel. I'm about to finish the most recent How a Realist Hero Saved the Kingdom, which is actually it's one of the best harems I've ever read. It's great. It's very funny, but it's also very logical in its own right. So I keep mowing through them. And just before I was on with you, when I was talking on Twitter with you, I was finishing up my fruit basket dose for the day because Yeah,
Good taste.
a little Toru, refreshes the soul.
Absolutely. We all need that in our lives.
Yes. Okay. Well, I want to thank you for getting online with me today. You are the author of Death by Ex-Girlfriend and Senkumo War Stories.
You got
And
it.
and you can follow him on Twitter at Haruto Tonbogiri. And I'm pretty sure that's probably the best way to keep track of what you're putting out.
Yes, I'll post updates pretty frequently and
All right.
stuff like that. So you will hear from me from there, even if I don't post too consistently.
Okay. All right. Well, again, thank you for joining me. And talking to creators like you is one of the main reasons I'm doing this, because I want to give everybody's story uh, a chance to get out there. I mean, everyone's creative voice deserves to be heard, and we're living in an age where the barriers for you to get your stories out there are at an all-time low. So if you're listening and you want to hear more like this, please subscribe to WLNM, and we hope to continue to highlight the best that independent creators have to offer. Thank you, and have a good afternoon.
This has been a WLNM podcast.